Unconscious bias is one of the most powerful forces shaping human behavior, not because it is loud or visible, but because it is silent, automatic, and often unchallenged. It lives beneath the surface of our thoughts, quietly influencing decisions we don't even realize we're making. And in places like airports, check-in counters, boarding gates, and customer service interactions, where split-second judgments are made every minute, this silent bias can cause real harm. When the black executive in this story stepped onto the plane, he carried with him not only his ticket and his credentials but the same fundamental expectation that every passenger has, to be treated fairly. Yet unconscious bias often redraws the lines of fairness without anyone announcing it. It operates like a filter, changing the way people interpret behavior, status, or even basic rights, depending on who is standing in front of them. In the airline scenario, the staff may not have openly declared discrimination, but the decision they made, choosing to downgrade a qualified, paying black executive to accommodate a white passenger, reveals how unseen mental shortcuts can override policy, logic, and ethics. No memo said, "Treat this person differently." No rulebook justified what happened. It was simply an unspoken assumption that one person's comfort mattered more than another's dignity, an assumption that forms the backbone of unconscious bias. Bias does not need anger to exist. It does not need loud hatred or visible conflict. It thrives in quiet, normal, everyday decisions. It hides in phrases like, "We thought it would be easier," "We assumed you wouldn't mind," or "We didn't think it was a big deal." It works through stereotypes absorbed over years, shaping expectations about who deserves priority, who appears important, who seems like they belong, and who can be inconvenienced without consequence. The airline employee may have believed they were simply solving a seating issue, but the underlying thought, the automatic preference toward the white passenger, reveals how deeply bias can influence even professional settings. And this bias becomes even more dangerous when combined with authority. When someone in a position of power makes a biased decision, it transforms into an action that can damage confidence, reputation, and emotional well-being. For the black executive, it wasn't merely about losing a seat. It was about being made to feel smaller, invisible, and undervalued in a space where he had every right to be respected. Understanding unconscious bias is crucial not just for individuals but for institutions. Companies often focus on customer satisfaction, brand image, and efficiency, but they sometimes overlook the subtle behaviors that erode trust. When bias shapes decisions, it doesn't just harm the individual who experiences it, it harms the organization by exposing weaknesses in training, awareness, and accountability. Every action taken by an employee becomes a representation of the company itself. And when an employee's decision is influenced by unconscious bias, the organization must face the consequences, both publicly and internally. This is why modern corporations invest in diversity training, inclusive policies, and anti-bias frameworks. But even then, policies alone are not enough. True change happens only when people are willing to question their automatic reactions and challenge the stereotypes they have absorbed over time. In the context of this incident, unconscious bias also affected the reactions of the surrounding passengers. Some may have noticed but stayed silent, unsure how to respond or unwilling to get involved. Silence, too, can be shaped by bias, by the assumption that certain injustices are not worth addressing or that someone else will speak up. It takes awareness and courage to interrupt a biased decision, especially in public settings. But every voice matters. When someone speaks up against a biased action, they don't just support the individual affected, they push the environment toward fairness and equality. Human behavior tends to follow the example set by the first person who takes a stand. That is why in so many stories like this one, a single witness becomes the catalyst for change, the spark that forces people to reconsider what they thought was normal or acceptable. Unconscious bias does not disappear overnight. It takes reflection, humility, and willingness to unlearn harmful assumptions. It requires recognizing that even well-meaning people can make unjust decisions when guided by automatic thoughts instead of intentional fairness. And it requires understanding that respect should never be conditional, selective, or negotiable, because the moment bias is allowed to influence how we treat others, we undermine the values of equality and dignity that every society claims to uphold. Titles, achievements, and professional status often create the illusion that success can shield a person from unfair treatment, but real life continues to prove that discrimination does not check resumes before it acts. When the black executive boarded that flight, he carried years of dedication, leadership, and excellence behind him. He represented someone who had climbed the professional ladder through discipline, intellect, and persistence. Yet none of that mattered in the moment an airline employee made a biased decision. The situation exposed a painful truth: no matter how high someone rises, prejudice can still try to pull them down. Society likes to believe that success equals immunity, that once a person reaches a certain level, they become untouchable by unfairness. But discrimination is not logical, it is not respectful of effort, and it does not acknowledge achievement. It works through perception, not reality, and it often targets people based on assumptions rather than facts. The executive's position should have guaranteed him the same respect any high-paying customer receives. He paid for his seat, earned his recognition, and followed the rules like every other traveler. Yet when the airline chose to downgrade him, it was not because of his actions or qualifications. It was because someone viewed him through a distorted lens that undervalued him compared to another passenger. Moments like these reveal that discrimination is not limited to the marginalized alone, it can reach even the successful, even the visible, even the accomplished. And it is precisely this contradiction that makes such incidents so damaging. They remind people that no achievement can fully erase the stereotypes others may hold about them. This reality creates a heavy emotional burden for individuals who constantly have to prove themselves more than others just to receive equal treatment. The executive's experience reflects the unspoken pressure many professionals face: the pressure to be twice as good just to be seen as equal, the pressure to maintain composure even when mistreated, and the pressure to avoid reacting in ways that could be misinterpreted or weaponized against them. The fear of confirming negative stereotypes often forces successful individuals to swallow their frustration, even in moments where anyone else would be justified in expressing anger. This silent restraint is the hidden cost of discrimination, a cost that never appears on paper but weighs deeply on the heart. In professional environments, society tends to celebrate success stories as proof that equality has been achieved, but isolated accomplishments do not erase systemic issues. Stories like this one highlight that discrimination is not eliminated by achievement, it sometimes becomes more subtle and more silent. And when successful individuals experience such treatment, the message spreads far beyond the incident itself. It sends a signal to younger generations watching from afar, telling them that even excellence may not always protect them. Yet at the same time, it exposes the cracks in the systems people rely on for fairness. If bias can affect someone at the top, it can certainly affect someone just starting out, someone without status, someone without visibility. This raises important questions about the true purpose of titles and professional accomplishments. They are meant to bring respect, opportunity, and access. They are meant to be symbols of capability and proof of one's dedication. But when discrimination steps in, it dismisses those symbols entirely, reducing a person not to their abilities but to the stereotypes others project onto them. And this disconnect between achievement and treatment forms one of the core challenges in the fight for equality. It becomes clear that the problem is not with the individuals who rise, it is with the systems and behaviors that refuse to rise with them. However, experiences like this also reveal something incredibly powerful: discrimination has no ability to diminish a person's true worth, even when it tries. The executive's value did not shrink because of the airline's decision. His achievements did not fade. His dignity did not disappear. What changed was the perception of those who witnessed the incident. They saw firsthand that unfair treatment does not discriminate by rank or status. They realized that success alone cannot dismantle prejudice, and that awareness plays a crucial role in pushing society toward better behavior. These moments serve as reminders that equality must be built on principle, not assumption, and that society must stop believing that titles can shield people from biased treatment. True respect must be extended to every person, regardless of background, position, or appearance, because discrimination loses its power only when fairness becomes a consistent habit rather than an occasional exception. There is a precise moment in every injustice when a person realizes that something is not right, a moment when dignity is no longer just an invisible expectation but becomes a point of conflict. For the black executive in this story, that moment came when he was informed that he would be downgraded from the seat he had paid for, the seat he rightfully owned. It was not a delay, not a mechanical issue, not a logistical mishap. It was a decision made by someone who assumed he could be moved without resistance, who assumed his inconvenience was insignificant compared to the comfort of another passenger. In that instant, the executive felt what many people have felt before him, the sting of being underestimated, the insult of being dismissed, and the weight of knowing that the treatment he received had nothing to do with his actions and everything to do with someone's perception of him. Moments like these are powerful because they strip away all the layers people build: education, career success, social standing, and expose the raw human need to be treated with fairness. Dignity is not about being praised or admired. It is about not being disrespected. It is about the simple right to exist in a space without being pushed aside. When someone's dignity is questioned, a natural reaction rises within them, a mixture of disbelief and determination. The executive could have reacted with anger, and no one would have blamed him. He could have argued loudly, refused to move, or demanded immediate justice. But dignity often shapes the way a person chooses to respond. Instead of letting the moment provoke chaos, he gathered himself, stood firm, and responded with clarity. His calmness did not mean he accepted the unfairness, it meant he understood the power of composure when confronting discrimination. Many people do not realize that dignity is a form of strength. It is the backbone that keeps a person balanced when the world tries to shake them. When the executive chose to maintain his composure, he not only protected his own sense of self-respect, but he also exposed the behavior of those mistreating him. His calmness made the injustice louder. His restraint made the airline employee's bias more visible. When treated unfairly, how a person responds can either hide or highlight the truth. In this case, his steady response forced others around him to see what was really happening, without distraction, without confusion, without the noise of emotional escalation. Dignity became a spotlight, revealing the imbalance of the situation. This moment also reflects a larger truth about human nature: people remember the way they feel when their dignity is challenged. It stays with them longer than the incident itself. It changes how they see institutions, how they trust systems, and how they interpret future interactions. The executive would likely remember not just the downgrade, but the expression on the employee's face, the tone of voice used, the hesitation or lack of empathy, and the reaction of the passengers around him. Dignity is deeply tied to emotional memory, and that is why such moments carry so much power. They shape perspectives and define how individuals move forward. But these moments are not only personal, they are also reflective of society. Every time someone's dignity is challenged, it reveals the cracks in the collective understanding of equality and respect. When the executive stood there, facing a decision clearly rooted in bias, the people watching were forced to confront their own beliefs. Some may have felt discomfort, some anger, some guilt for staying silent. These internal reactions are important because they are the first steps toward awareness. People do not become advocates by accident, they become advocates because they witness something that shakes their conscience. The moment dignity is challenged becomes the moment truth enters the room. It is when excuses fade and reality becomes undeniable. It is when people are forced to question why certain decisions are made, why certain individuals are targeted, and why fairness seems conditional instead of universal. The executive's experience is not just a personal struggle, it becomes a symbol of the countless moments many people face in different spaces: schools, offices, airports, stores, where they are judged not by their merit but by assumptions. And every time someone chooses to respond with strength, clarity, and dignity, they reclaim their power and disrupt the pattern that allowed the injustice in the first place. Corporations often present themselves as polished, customer-focused, and committed to fairness, but behind the scenes there is always a silent struggle between protecting their public image and taking responsibility for their actions. In the airline incident, this conflict becomes impossible to ignore. On the surface, the airline might claim to value equality, professionalism, and respect for every passenger. Their advertisements probably show smiling staff, diverse passengers, and promises of comfort. But in the moment an employee decided to downgrade the black executive to make room for a white passenger, the truth slipped through the cracks. It was not the company's slogan that determined the decision, it was the employee's personal judgment, shaped by bias, convenience, and an assumption that no one would question it. And this reveals a major problem within many corporations: image is crafted carefully, but responsibility is frequently handled carelessly. Corporate responsibility means owning the consequences of every decision made by every representative of the company. When a staff member acts, the company acts. When a staff member chooses bias, the company becomes responsible for that bias. Yet many corporations attempt to separate the individual from the institution once things go wrong. They say it was a misunderstanding, an isolated mistake, a miscommunication. But the passengers watching the scene unfold are not evaluating the intentions of one person, they are forming opinions about the airline itself. They see the uniform, the logo, the authority. They do not differentiate between the employee and the company, and they shouldn't have to. Corporations benefit from the trust their employees carry, so they must also carry the burden when those employees fail to uphold fairness. This is where the conflict between corporate image and corporate responsibility becomes clear. Maintaining a clean public image requires avoiding scandals, minimizing headlines, and controlling the narrative. But responsibility requires acknowledging wrongdoing, facing criticism, and repairing the harm caused. When an airline chooses image over accountability, it risks worsening the situation. Passengers notice insincerity. Witnesses feel insulted. The individual harmed feels invalidated. And the public, especially in today's world where every phone can record and every moment can go viral, loses trust quickly. The more a company tries to deny or soften the impact of discrimination, the louder the backlash becomes. In the executive's case, the airline's mistake was not only the downgrade itself, but the assumption that no one would challenge the decision. They assumed it would pass quietly, unnoticed, unimportant. But incidents like this do not disappear. They grow. They spread from one witness to another. They gain life when someone asks a simple question: why was he moved? And when the answer does not make sense, people start to see the contradictions between what the company claims to stand for and what actually happened. The conflict between image and responsibility becomes public, unavoidable, and damaging. Corporate responsibility is not just about apologizing after an incident. It is about creating a culture where such incidents are far less likely to happen. It is about training employees to recognize bias, giving them tools to make fair decisions, and setting clear expectations that discriminatory behavior will not be tolerated. It is about empowering staff to speak up when they witness injustice and establishing a system that supports fairness even when it is inconvenient. Without these structures, image becomes hollow, and customers see right through it. People do not want a company that only looks good, they want a company that behaves well. The airline's decision to downgrade the executive reflects a deeper issue within many organizations. Policies exist on paper, but behavior is shaped by everyday choices. If a company truly values equality, it must turn its values into consistent action. That means monitoring employee behavior, rewarding fairness, challenging bias, and correcting misconduct quickly and transparently. It means understanding that one discriminatory incident can undo years of branding work. It means recognizing that customers remember moments when dignity was violated far longer than they remember marketing campaigns. The regret the airline felt afterward was not only about the consequences they faced, it was about being exposed. They were forced to confront the gap between what they promise and what they practice. And this exposure becomes a turning point for any corporation. It forces them to choose whether they will evolve or remain unchanged. It forces them to decide whether protecting their image is more important than doing what is right. And it forces them to realize that in a world where truth can spread instantly, the only sustainable image is the one built on genuine responsibility. In every moment of injustice, there is almost always someone watching, someone who sees what others overlook, someone who becomes the bridge between a quiet incident and a public awakening. In the case of the black executive being downgraded, that person was a witness who refused to let the moment slip into silence. What makes witnesses powerful is not their position or authority, it is their ability to transform a private act of discrimination into something the world cannot ignore. When the witness saw the unfair downgrade, they did not immediately speak to the executive, nor did they confront the airline employee with aggression. Instead, they observed closely, listened to the tone of the interaction, watched the expressions, and recognized that something deeper than a simple seating adjustment was taking place. Witnesses often sense the truth long before anyone admits it, and their awareness becomes the first step toward justice. Most unfair incidents continue unnoticed because the people around them choose to remain silent. They tell themselves it is not their business, that someone else will speak up, or that the situation will resolve itself. But silence can be as harmful as the act itself. Silence gives bias room to grow. Silence allows inequality to hide in plain sight. When the witness in this story decided not to remain silent, they disrupted the pattern. Their decision to step forward changed the energy of the moment. The airline employee, who initially acted with complete confidence, began to feel the weight of being watched. And when someone is being watched, accountability enters the space. It becomes harder to justify unfair decisions. It becomes harder to ignore the truth of what happened. The presence of an aware witness transforms a private exchange into a public matter. The witness did not need authority to create change. They only needed the courage to speak. When they asked why the executive was being moved, their question was simple, but its impact was profound. Suddenly, the airline employee was pushed to explain a decision that had no valid explanation. Suddenly, the passengers around them started listening. Suddenly, the truth that was meant to remain hidden began to surface. One question, asked by one person, forced an entire situation into clarity. Witnesses often underestimate their own power, but in moments like these, the smallest act can break down the wall of injustice. The witness's involvement also gave the executive something incredibly important: validation. When a person is treated unfairly, they often question their own perception first. They wonder if they misunderstood the situation or if they are overreacting. But when someone else recognizes the injustice too, it reinforces the truth. It tells the person affected that they are not alone, that the mistreatment is real, and that someone is willing to stand beside them. Validation restores a sense of dignity that discrimination tries to take away. The witness, by simply acknowledging the unfairness, gave the executive the support he needed to stand firm without feeling isolated. What makes this witness even more impactful is that they did not stop at questioning. Their voice encouraged others to pay attention. More passengers started watching. Some began recording. Others whispered among themselves. Collective awareness began to grow. And once a group sees the truth, it cannot be undone. The airline employee, who once assumed no one would care, now faced a crowd that cared deeply. This shift in public energy forced the situation into a different direction. The witness created a ripple effect, turning observation into awareness and awareness into action. Moments like these remind us that witnesses are often the catalysts for change in society. History is filled with injustices that would have been forgotten if not for the people who spoke up, documented, or intervened. A witness has the power to expose what others try to hide, to challenge what others accept, and to amplify the voices of those who have been silenced. In the airline incident, the witness transformed a small act of discrimination into a larger conversation, one that could not be ignored by the airline or the people watching. The involvement of the witness eventually forced the airline to reconsider its actions, not because they wanted to but because they had to. Once the truth becomes visible to many, institutions lose the ability to cover it with excuses. The witness's courage turned a quiet injustice into a public reckoning, showing how one person's decision to speak can change the outcome of an entire situation. The outcome of the airline's decision did not unfold the way they expected. They believed downgrading the black executive would be a small, quiet adjustment that no one would question. They assumed the inconvenience would go unnoticed, that the passenger would reluctantly comply, and that the flight would continue without disruption. But discrimination has a way of circling back to those who cause it. The moment the witness spoke up, the situation began to shift. What the airline thought would remain hidden started gaining attention. Passengers who had been focused on their seats, screens, and luggage suddenly became aware of the injustice happening just a few rows away. The eyes that turned toward the scene brought a pressure the airline staff had not anticipated. What began as a private decision was transforming into a public incident with consequences waiting to unfold. As more passengers became aware, the airline employees' confidence began to weaken. They had acted with a sense of authority, believing the decision was final and unchallengeable. But when confronted by multiple questioning voices, authority quickly turned into uncertainty. Injustice loses strength the moment people refuse to accept it. And in this case, the executive's calm dignity combined with the witness's courage created a wave of accountability that forced the airline staff to reconsider their actions. Their regret did not come from any sudden moral realization, it came from the growing fear of what this incident could become. In a world where stories spread instantly and reputations can collapse overnight, companies know that moments of discrimination can ignite outrage far beyond the walls of the airplane. What strengthened the outcome even more was the way the executive remained composed. His calmness exposed the truth with greater clarity than anger ever could. Passengers saw a man who had been wronged yet refused to lose control. They saw a person who respected himself even when he was not being respected. His posture, his tone, and his restraint made the airline's behavior look even more unreasonable. The contrast between dignity and discrimination made it impossible for anyone watching to deny what was happening. And when the truth becomes undeniable, those responsible for the injustice begin to fear the consequences. The airline staff started realizing that their decision was not simply an internal action, it had become a public moment with witnesses ready to hold them accountable. Eventually, the situation reached a point where the airline could no longer push forward with their original decision. They realized the potential backlash. They understood that passengers were documenting the interaction. They knew that if the incident reached social media, the story would spread faster than they could control. Companies dread viral stories that expose discrimination because such stories do not just damage their image temporarily, they can lead to public outrage, legal consequences, and long-term reputation loss. The airline regretted the moment their employee acted on bias because they now faced the cost of trying to fix an act that should never have occurred. Their regret grew heavier as they saw passengers' reactions, the executive's unwavering poise, and the witness's persistence. They were forced to recognize that a simple apology would not erase the memory of what had happened. What makes the outcome even more meaningful is the way the executive used his voice once he realized he had the attention of the passengers and the airline. He did not shout. He did not insult. He simply articulated the unfairness, expressed the facts, and allowed the truth to stand on its own. His words carried the weight of years of experience, the pain of countless similar stories, and the strength of someone who refused to be diminished. The airline staff, confronted with such clarity, could no longer justify their actions. The passengers listening could no longer stay neutral. The atmosphere of the cabin shifted from confusion to solidarity. The airline had lost control of the narrative, and the executive was reclaiming the respect that should never have been taken from him. Ultimately, the airline was forced to reverse their decision. They had to correct the downgrade, offer apologies, and try to salvage the situation. But their regret did not end there. The witnesses would talk about the incident long after the flight landed. Some would share it online. Some would report it. Some would warn others about the airline. The company would have to deal with the consequences of a biased moment that they initially believed would go unnoticed. Their regret stemmed from more than embarrassment, it came from realizing how deeply one act of discrimination can damage trust. They learned that fairness cannot be optional, that respect cannot be selective, and that every action taken by an employee reflects on the entire organization.